So in retrospect, I think a rain jacket of some kind probably would have been prudent. You would think living in the Pacific Northwest, I would know by now that it's always a good idea to bring a rain jacket, but apparently not. Can you hear the tree frogs? They're definitely like out in force at this point. I'm hoping that I don't get back to edit this at home and find out that all you can hear is tree frogs. You can't hear my voice. Hopefully you can hear them. It's pretty cool. But anywho, good morning everybody, and glad that you could make it back. Today I wanted to talk about ditty bags. What is a ditty bag? What's in my ditty bag? That sort of thing. I honestly think that ditty bags are something that don't get a whole ton of discussion compared to the big three. So, you know, your tent, your sleeping bag, and your pack. But I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that you can tell more about a backpacker by what is in their ditty bag than their pack, their shelter, or their tent. Honestly, I have nothing to substantiate that claim. But I do think that the small items that we take with us, for the most part, are actually way more fun. Generally speaking, your smaller items, or your ditties, as we'll call them, you ever have one of those days where you just can't talk correctly? Yeah, today's that day. But because they're a little bit less expensive than, again, sort of the bigger items, you can always be tweaking them with every new trip, and it's something that you can really nerd out on. I find that I get a really similar new gear high from, let's say, getting like some new adapters to go with my electronics kit as I do from buying a new tent. So it really is a ton of fun to constantly be updating all of the small things that you take with you. When we talk about a ditty bag, I think that everybody has a somewhat different opinion of what that means. For me, it's really all of the small stuff that I take with me. I try to keep in one spot so that I don't lose it. But with some people, it will refer to, let's say, just their toiletries or just their electronics or something along those lines, or really just all of the things that they keep in one bag that they call a ditty bag. Whereas again, for me, it kind of encompasses all of the small stuff, and that small stuff honestly moves around quite a bit. It doesn't always live in my ditty bag, so to speak. So for instance, you could take my headlamp, which I consider to be part of my ditty bag because it's a small thing that I try to keep in there so that I don't lose it. But depending on the day, that could be in the outside pocket of my pack, it could be up front on my chest, could be on my head. It really just kind of depends, but eventually it makes its way back to the ditty bag. Also, I do want to say just to take what I take with me with a very healthy pinch of salt. I take a relatively minimal kit with me, and I'm not suggesting that anyone should try to replicate my first aid or my repair kit, for instance. It works great for me, but everybody's different, and you should definitely build out something that works well for you and that you're comfortable with. So with that, let's get into our ditty bag. Right now, my ditty bag is this small Z-Packs dry bag, which has been working pretty well, although I do think that I might switch it up at some point. The reason being is that with dry bags, when you roll them down, they kind of tighten up into this sort of ball shape, which is kind of difficult to pack. What I've been considering instead is going with like a medium-sized, just regular DCF stuff sack. That way when I have stuff in it, I can kind of mush it in all the different cracks in my pack and stuff, just to kind of fill in as many of those gaps as possible when I'm packing. Because for me personally, I normally keep my ditty bag inside my pack all the way on the top. It kind of functions like the brain that you would see on a more like traditional backpacking pack, that flap on the top that has like a zipper on it that covers the main compartment. But for now, I'm gonna keep on using this, and I'm gonna experiment with putting this in the front pocket of my pack and just seeing if it works there. We'll see how I feel about it. It is somewhat heavy. I should have gotten a weight for you before actually doing this video, but I totally forgot. But it's around 1.5 pounds or something like that because it includes all of my electronics. And while I do think that having it on the front pouch of my pack is gonna be a little bit more convenient, with that weight, I just don't know if it's gonna throw me off my center of gravity. It might just end up being really uncomfortable, but we'll see how it plays out. I like to always just make sure that things don't work before I buy something new. I try to not always be buying new stuff just because. The first thing that I keep in here is first aid. So let me dig around a little bit and grab my first aid stuff. I'm just kind of spreading everything out on the ground at this point so that it's easy to find. My first aid and some of my repair things live in this tiny plastic pouch inside of my ditty bag. I put them in this pouch just in case some water does get in there, or more likely some dirt as well. I don't want things like my Leuco tape or my DCF tape, which I use for repair, to get dirt all over it. It'll start peeling back and then it'll get all like filthy and dirty, and then it just won't be as easy to use. So I like to keep them nice and clean in here. But the first and probably the most important thing that I carry with me in my first aid kit is prescription meds. I don't have them with me just because they're back at home in the medicine cabinet because I take them every day. But you may remember from a video that I made a while back that I've been going through some health issues and I take prescription medication every day to make me feel just a little bit better. So it's super important that I have that with me on the trail. Something that I would recommend that I don't have with me right now would be Aleve or ibuprofen or some kind of painkiller. And the reason that I don't personally carry that is because one of the prescription medications that I take is a prescription NSAID, which is basically the same thing as an Aleve or an ibuprofen, and I'm not supposed to double them up. So basically, since I'm already taking a painkiller every day, I'm not really supposed to be taking any more, so I don't take them with me out on trips anymore. But for most people, some kind of over-the-counter painkiller in case you twist an ankle or just have some regular muscle aches or whatever is a nice thing to have in your pack. Up until recently, I never really used them, even though I had them with me, but a little bit of over-the-counter pain medication is super light, and you can sort of think of it as an insurance policy in case something goes wrong, or you have it there to help somebody out if they have a headache or something like that. I also have assorted band-aids in here, a whole bunch of different sizes. Because I already have leukotape, which is something that I'll get to here in a moment, I have been considering ditching the band-aids and then getting some gauze instead that I could then combine with the leukotape to kind of make my own band-aids. The thing is, that just sort of sounds like a big pain in the ass. Also, I don't know how sterile it would actually be. And, you know, it's not that hard just to carry a couple of band-aids. It's one of those things that, again, I rarely use, but every now and again I nick myself with a pocket knife or something like that, so it's nice to be able to wrap it up. And the rain is back. Can you hear it? God, I love it out here. The rain always just makes everything feel and smell so, like, fresh and clean. It's awesome. And one more thing that I don't have in here that probably should go out with everybody is just some Imodium. It's good for upset stomachs, which does occasionally happen, especially when you have a whole bunch of dirty hands sharing hiker food. That said, you should definitely be washing your hands. And then up next, not in this little pouch, but just kind of floating around freely in my ditty bag, I like to carry these little Natrapel wipes. Natrapel? I don't really know. But these things work really well. I don't use them super often. For whatever reason, bugs just don't seem to bother me all that much. But if I do need it, just rip it open and then kind of wipe down with it, and it's good for 12 hours or so. Once I get through these, I'm probably going to replace them with a small spray bottle that I found on Garage Grown Gear, which I'll put bug spray in, just because I don't really like the idea of constantly creating more garbage by ripping these things open and then throwing them out. And while the spray bottles and the bottles that insect repellent come in are still plastic, you know, at least it's a step in the right direction. But overall, Natrapel seems to work really well for me, and it's nice because it doesn't have any DEET in it, which I don't personally love, just because they say it's not great for you in terms of health, but also it can melt your synthetic clothing and gear, so I just try to stay away from it unless I'm in an area where I absolutely need to use DEET. For instance, I went to the Amazon in college, covered myself in DEET. But for Washington, these work great. And then back to my little plastic baggie here. Also inside of here, I have 3 feet of leukotape. It's sort of wrapped around this little tube. And this tiny little tube contains, oh, losing stuff, some small tweezers. And these are like real legit tweezers with an actual point on them, so they're great for ticks, thorns, really anything that you have to like dig in for. I found that these are awesome, way better than the ones that are on like a Victorinox Classic, which I always carry, which I'll get to in a moment here. These are just far superior in terms of actually being able to dig stuff out. And then I also carry a couple of safety pins as well. They're good for lancing blisters, random repairs, that sort of thing. But back to the leukotape, it replaces moleskin, and having the 3 feet section that's on here, I can really roll it out and then just cut it to whatever size I need depending on what area I'm trying to patch up on my body. It's also got some stretch to it, so you can use it to compress any injured areas or things like that, and supposedly it stays on your body pretty much forever. I haven't had it on for that long that I've been able to test it, but that's what people say. I originally couldn't figure out where to put it because it comes in a big old honk and roll like this big, but again, wrapping it around this tiny little tube seems to work out great. And finally, not really first aid, but more of an emergency thing, I always carry a book of matches as well. This lives in the plastic bag with my repair stuff and my band-aids, and sometimes this feels like overkill to have with me because I always take a lighter with me for my stove anyway, but the thing with lighters is you never know when they're actually going to run out of fuel. It's like one day it's just kind of out, whereas with these I always know that I can get a fire going if I need to. So that's about it for first aid. Now moving on to repair, which again a lot of it lives in this little bag. I have my Victorinox Classic, and this just hangs out in the ditty bag, just sort of floating around in there. I got this to replace my Gerber LST, which I made a video about last last year where I said that I wasn't going to be carrying a knife anymore, or I thought that I would switch out for a pair of scissors. Half the internet lost their minds, but what I ended up deciding on was this guy here, really because all I do want is just a pair of scissors, but this was the tiniest and most convenient form factor that I could find. Also, they come in lots of pretty designs. I happen to have Glacier National Park. Fun fact, I've never been there, but I got the Mount Rainier design for Lynn, and I didn't want to double up and have us both have exactly the same knife, and this was my second favorite design that they had on the website. I'm sure I'll visit Glacier soon. But as an overview, this does have the scissors, which is what I wanted. It has a small knife as well, nail file, and a screwdriver. Also built into the side, you have a toothpick and tweezers, which I kind of talked about earlier. I also keep some alcohol swabs in here, which I need to replace before my next trip, but they can be used to clean wounds, but more often than not, I actually use them to clean gear before I apply a patch of some kind. So very useful for that. And then I also have a Thermarest repair kit in here as well. I'm not going to try and take it out. I'll end up just dropping it all over the ground, but it's a few different pieces and it's used to patch my Thermarest air pad. Hopefully I'll never need to use it, but I do like to carry it with me just in case I spring a leak. I don't know if I trust duct tape to fix it. I'd rather just have the actual repair kit. It doesn't weigh much. I also have 12 feet of Zingit cut into 3-foot sections. I like to pre-cut lengths of cord rather than taking a whole bunch of it and then cutting it in the field, just because I'll end up with a whole bunch of random sizes of cord when I get home that I'll never use again. Whereas if I pre-cut it, I can just always keep this with me and I don't have a whole bunch of weird lengths at the end of a trip. I use this most often when tarp camping in case I need to extend a line, but the same principle also applies to tent camping if I need to extend a line for a snow anchor, for instance. And I can always combine these lengths with a sheet bend if I need to make a clothesline or something like that if I'm so inclined. So funny story, I did actually forget to take a bear bag line with me one time, and I was able to use this combined with a couple of sections of rope off of my tarp to make a 30 to 40 foot line, which I could then use to hang a bear bag. So it is nice to have. And then back in the little plastic baggie, I have 3 feet of Gorilla Tape. This is sort of my favorite in terms of duct tape like products. It's just aggressively sticky, so it works really well. And I just take 3 feet off the roll and then fold it back on itself to make a nice rectangle like this, and it fits perfectly in the little bag. I also have a few of these DCF patches along with a DCF repair tape, which is in here somewhere. I probably don't need both, to be quite honest, but again, it's super light, so I just carry them because I have them. And I also have a spare gasket for my water filter, just because every now and again I will lose one, which kills me because it's littering, but it does happen sometimes and the water filter really doesn't work well without it, so I always carry a spare. And moving on to electronics, these all live in a separate Ziploc freezer bag with the exception of my headlamp, and it's just so that I don't get dust and stuff in the ports. I'm not super worried about them getting wet in the dry bag, I just don't want the ports to clog up. First up in here is my Nitecore NB10000 Gen 2 power bank. It's my current power bank of choice just because it's silly lightweight and it's nice and small. That said, the pointy corners, I don't know if you can see this, but they're a little bit annoying. They actually do kind of poke holes in the Ziploc bag here as it moves around, so I'm gonna put some Gorilla Tape or something like that on them at some point. I just haven't gotten around to it. I also have a wall charger, which is the Anker 323 wall charger. This has the same ports on it as what is on the Nitecore power bank. And then I have just some miscellaneous adapters and cables, which I'll grab out of here. For cables, I have a USB-A to USB-C, and then a USB-C to USB-C. And then for the adapters, we have a USB-C to micro USB and a USB-C to iPhone. After racking my brain for a really long time, I came to the conclusion that this setup, so the wall charger plus the power bank plus these cables, was the least amount of stuff that I could carry with me to charge all of my devices, but also make sure that I'm able to charge 2 things at once at all times. So whether that means charging 2 devices directly from the power bank or charging 1 device through the wall charger and another pass through from the wall charger through the power bank. So yes, quite a lot of time was put into figuring out this relatively simple idea. I do think I'm eventually going to get longer cables than the ones that I have. I originally went with these just because they're obviously very light and very small, but in retrospect, it's kind of annoying to have your phone dangling from the wall. I did make a whole video on this electronic setup, so feel free to check that out if you're interested. For my headlamp, I use the Nightcore NU25. I really love this headlamp. It's definitely brighter than I need, and I could probably go just a little bit lighter by replacing the strap with one of the ultralight ones, but the strap is super comfortable, so I just really haven't felt a need to do it. Also, this was a gift from Lynn when I lost my Petzl Zipka, so it has a little bit of sentimental value to it. The Zipka has since been found, but this is way more comfortable, so this is what I take with me. I also carry some Apple AirPods too, because I do like to listen to music while on the trail. I think that there are lots of different opinions on that, but that's just what I like to do. And obviously I like to make sure that I'm not disturbing others, so headphones are the way to go. At some point I do want to replace these with wired earbuds, just because the AirPods are one more thing that I need to think about charging. Also, the AirPods are relatively easy to misplace. I recently lost one of my AirPods on a trip, and I noticed that I didn't have it on me as I was actually leaving camp. It turns out that it was in the pocket of my puffy, which was all the way down at the bottom of my pack, and I spent about an hour following myself around on the Find My app on my iPhone. In here I also have my InReach Messenger, and this is used primarily to check in with people back home and just to let everyone know that I'm all right and I can send back my location and stuff like that. It has a theoretical battery life that's significantly better than the InReach Mini 2, but I haven't found the battery life to be all that awesome. That said, it's probably user error because Lynn and I tend to talk quite a bit when I'm out on trail. I went with this device specifically just because I don't need a built-in screen because I use my phone for navigation when I'm out on trail, and it was about $100 cheaper than the Mini 2. And also, I carry my iPhone, of course. It's like a decade old, and there's nothing special about it other than the fact that it's paid off. I am going to pick up an iPhone 15 Pro at some point here, just because it has a way better camera than this one. And while, in my opinion, a phone isn't quite the same as having an actual full-frame camera, I do want to be able to have the option of leaving my big camera at home and just being able to take this with me if I want to go super light. And to wrap up, there's probably some things that you think that I'm forgetting that actually just live other places in my pack. For instance, my toothbrush, toothpaste, chapstick, and sunscreen all live in my food bag when not in use. This is just because these items are smelly and can attract critters, so I like to be able to hang them up in a tree with the rest of my food at the end of the day. Sunscreen usually makes its way into the front pocket of my pack throughout the day, but again, it always ends up back in the food bag. My trowel, bidet, toilet paper, and soap all live in a separate stuff sack in the front of my pack. I just like to have these in their own separate bags so that when I need to use them, I can just grab them and go. I don't have to be searching around to find those items. And again, I should have weighed it before I left the house this morning, but I will weigh it when I get home, and I will drop the weight right here. Is it there? I hope it's there. So with that, I would love to hear what kinds of things you keep in your ditty bag, and if there's anything that you think that I should add or remove from my list. So feel free to let me know down in the comments below. If you'd like to see everything that's in my pack, feel free to check out my fall gear list video. Nothing has really changed much since then. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one.